What's up, my Canadian cousins? Welcome back to the channel. So I am getting into a very lighthearted but I think interesting topic about the Canadian stamp on the English language. I've said this in another video in which I was saying I was going to be doing this, is that I've been very interested in the history of the English language, how it developed from the Germanic Old English into Middle English. When I was in college, I read, Chaucer, and I read Beowulf along with its interpretation. So Beowulf was in Old English, I believe, and Chaucer Middle English, and just seeing how modern English throughout the English-speaking world has developed. And of course, the generalized Canadian accent and the generalized American accent are very similar. Of course, there are regional differences all over the place. And from what I understand, time is one of the factors, which is why there's so much language diversity and accent diversity on the small island of Great Britain, which is why there's more accent diversity in the eastern part of North America as opposed to the West, which is, had been settled a lot longer after the East had during the colonial period, beginning in the early 1600s, really. So very fascinating. I want to get into the video. Let's talk Canadian, my friends. And if you enjoy this content, please hit a like. And if you're not already and you are so inclined, please subscribe. We are fastly approaching 10,000 subscribers, which is, relatively small for a channel that has gained enough traction to continue. And I would love to hit that milestone. All right, my friends, I'll see you soon. Enjoy. Oh, by the way, this video looks like it's pretty old.
Canadians spell
maybe
words
the 1990s,
differently.
I'm not sure, late 90s.
Canadians
early
definitely
2000s.
talk differently.
Well, all the cape was took out of the ocean.
The fuss is about taking our citizens. It's about not censoring our art. It's about...
Some think our language is,
A corrupt dialogue.
So I was walking down the street, eh?
it's all a little confusing.
Either.
We're talking Canadian.
Like, you guys still remember first day of school in grade 9? And like, all our kilts were like, oh my god. Down to here.
Right off the bat, grade 9, we would say 9th grade.
Sometimes, to be absolutely frank, Canadians do sound a bit American.
Now I have to like choose like what to wear, like everything. I don't know if I can have.
These teenagers are in Toronto. They could be somewhere in LA or on Mars.
Like, then you just get weird looks at school if you show up in like a skirt. Because basically anywhere around here, if you show up in a skirt, people give you weird looks.
So my reason for speaking to you about the monarchy, the highest institution of our society.
But that's Canadian too, an obsolete form spoken by our first Canadian-born Governor-General, Vincent Massey.
We can't slow the pace of human events.
We don't sound like that now, although some of it is stuck.
And this evening I want to talk to you about a very special part of present-day Canada.
So that, to me, sounds, like a mixture between North American and British, and that existed here in the United States too. The way that we both speak with a rhotic accent, where we pronounce our R's, was the way the majority of people spoke in Britain at the time of early colonization. You can still find that in Britain in places like the West Country, Devonshire, in particular Devonshire. That Devon type of accent actually still exists here in the United States in isolated islands off the coast of Virginia and I think North Carolina. It's very interesting.
Community. Because of a shift in shipping patterns in the mid-19th century, and probably also because of sympathizing with the northern cause in the Civil War, Ocracoke Island was relatively isolated from the mainland for a long time. It developed maybe one of the most distinctive and different dialects in North America. Obliging islanders will sometimes say to tourists, well, it's high tide on the same side. Last night the water far, night the moon shine, no fish. Ocracoke Islanders are sometimes called high tiders because of that particularly distinctive I sound. And their accent is sometimes taken to be British or Australian, even by Brits.
But if you, listen to a speech by, for example, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, you'll hear some of this too.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now.
too. And I think there was, you know, some mimicking in the upper crust about an influence about what was going on in Britain with the evolution of its accent into a primarily non-rhotic accent today.
Sound like that now, although some of it is stuck.
And this evening I want to talk to you about a very special part of present-day Canada. The monarchy.
You hear just a hint of it here and there. The skirmishes in a centuries-old battle between American English and English English. We're in the middle, talking Canadian.
That polyester leisure suit?
Leisure.
Leisure.
It's definitely leisure.
I guarantee you, it's leisure.
Harassment. Harassment.
There are Americans that also say harassment.
No, it's harassment.
It's not as common,
Schedule.
but it exists.
Schedule. The proper pronunciation is schedule.
Napkin.
Serviette.
Napkin.
Either. Either.
Either, or good.
These Vancouver teenagers can't decide. Now that's talking Canadian. But there's more to it than that. For one thing, what it means to talk Canadian is constantly changing.
I don't know. I use both. Yeah.
And nobody completely understands how or why. Jack Chambers is a linguist. He spent decades hunting, trapping, tagging, and dissecting Canadian English. That thing he's sitting on, for example, Canadians used to call it a Chesterfield, after an eminent British nobleman.
Well, Chesterfield was the great Canadianism because it originated in England, but as the name for a very special piece of furniture, a monstrous divan, settee, davenport. Then the word came to Canada for the name of any piece of furniture that was upholstered and stuffed and held 2 or 3 or 4 people. It has been supplanted since the 1950s by the word couch. First there was a little ripple in favor of sofa, almost exclusively the term that's known by teenagers and people in their 20s across Canada.
But they would know Chesterfield if you said it, right? I think, because probably they grew up hearing some older people say it. I would also say sofa is still an alternate form of couch here. It's said rarely among younger people, even my age, but older generation people would say it. My grandmother certainly did.
The Americans won the Couch War. But when push came to shove, Canadians preferred the British for...
tap.
This.
Instead of faucet.
It's a...
tap.
The Americans call it a faucet. And this...
Yet we call it tap water when water comes out of the tap.
Luggage.
Go figure.
Yeah, luggage, yes.
In Dallas, it's baggage.
Blinds, yeah.
In Detroit, they're shades. But when it comes to this...
Both are used. Shades and blinds.
Rubber band. Rubber band. Rubber band. Rubber band.
The British elastic seems to be losing its grip.
An elastic band.
Because when there's a choice, we usually choose American. Take words to do with cars. Do you think you'd hear this in Moose Jaw?
I took a diversion off the motorway looking for some petrol. At the pump, the fit bloke took a spanner under my bonnet to check my gearbox fluid and sparking plugs. When he was satisfied, he took his chamois to my windscreen.
Funny example.
Because English and American English started going in different directions well before cars and car words were invented. And Canadian English is basically American English, imported by English-speaking American loyalists who moved to Canada to get away from the Revolution. This was in the late 1700s. They sounded a lot like this.
I've been fixing and cutting my field here near on 10 days, Abijah.
Uh-huh. Guess you better sally out then before your limbs get considerable tired from standing there.
Certainly.
It's not quite young and bluer, but it's the foundation of Canadian English, and it's Yankee.
Scarce ever was a good field that didn't get cut.
Uh-huh.
The loyalists brought with them the accent and dialect of the Midland United States, which was different by then from the accent and dialect that was spoken in England, not only because of changes that had happened in North America, but also because of cataclysmic changes that had happened in England at the same period. In the 1700s, England became R-less, for one thing. So English people say ca and cot, where we say car and cart with an R in them.
Car. I mean, from what I've studied, he's probably the expert and I'm not. I don't know why I'm questioning it, but my recollection was it started in the 1700s, but it really, really didn't get prevalent until far later, into the 1800s. I don't know.
Car. Cart.
There were also vowel changes.
And we imported that back here in New York and New England, for example. I mean, the New York accent doesn't sound quite as pretty as a received pronunciation British accent, but it's non-rhotic. My mother said get in the car, and in Boston it would be more like ca, New York, ca. Either way, non-rhotic.
Lunch and France and dance, words like that which have an ah sound, where we have branch and France and dance, an ah sound. And the difference is, although it's only a small vowel difference, makes a real impression on our ears. That also is a change that took place in England after the colonization of North America.
The Loyalists set up the school systems in Upper Canada. Their children talked and spelled American.
Lieutenant, XYZ. Honor, HONOR.
And used American terms instead of British ones,
Wagon.
for what the British called a carriage,
Fix.
when the British said mend,
Store.
instead of shop. This worried the British governors who still ran Canada, especially after the Americans invaded in 1812. They brought in 1 million people direct from Britain, with no adulterating stopovers in the United States allowed. Some of them, the more delicate blossoms, were appalled by the Americanisms that assailed their refined and discriminating ears. The Reverend A. Constable Geeky put it to the Canadian Institute in brutal terms. The local language was
a corrupt dialogue full of lawless and vulgar innovations that threatened to produce a language as unlike our noble mother tongue as the Negro Patois or the Chinese Pidgin English.
Geeky considered his language had been ravished, not just by
wagon.
Man of his time. Way to be racist, but yeah, I get it.
And store.
But
boss.
Instead of master. And
bug.
For any kind of insect.
To call a firefly a lightning bug is not only an abuse of language, but a breach of good taste, which it might be thought no person of refinement could ever perpetrate.
Well, yes. Something had to be done.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there for a second. You guys say firefly or lightning bug? Because it seems like different regions in the U.S. say it differently. And I kind of grew up with it interchangeably. Probably we would say lightning bug maybe a little bit more often, but firefly certainly was acceptable when we said it. Just curious. And I wonder if that's regional in Canada as well.
A battalion of Scottish schoolmasters was deployed to put things back to rights.
Lieutenant.
If anyone's a Pink Floyd fan, this is reminding me of the schoolmaster in The Wall. You behind the brakes then, laddie. Stand still.
XYZ. Honor. HONOUR.
In the same spirit, our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, decreed that British OUR spellings be official in Canada. No coarse and stubby Yankee ORs. But in spite of the Scots, the students still talked like Yankees.
Heard a little bit of the Canada Forever, Maple Leaf Forever in the background. Yeah, so that's very interesting. So this was a concerted effort to Anglify, I guess, Britishify the language in Canada in spellings, and it wasn't that way to begin with. Very interesting. I've gotten so used to, after doing this channel for a couple of years now, seeing your comments, and I do notice that there's differences that actually some of you would use OR instead of OUR. Minority of you, but some. And I've gotten so used to seeing the Canadian way to spell words that it's just, I don't even really notice it anymore. And in fact, I was writing a comment recently to somebody where they used the word honor in it, and without even thinking, I typed it with an OUR. And then I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should correct that so that somebody doesn't think I am doing that on purpose to pander. And I did correct it back to my way.
And before you knew it, the British kids sounded just like them.
Hello. Would you lend me some paper? Paper? Paper. Yes. Would you lend me some paper? Thank you. Thanks.
And thanks to her, Canadians yet unborn would say thanks sometimes instead of thank you. And so would their children, and their children. And so will ours. Or most of them. West is west, and east is east, and never the twain shall sound the same. American English was winning Upper Canada, but by God, the British held Newfoundland.
Sure did.
Most settlers came here directly from
The
West
Irish.
Country England and Eastern Ireland.
Yeah.
In the isolated outports, they handed down their language, pure and whole and colorful.
And people were very inventive at telling stories. And there were expressions like having a good cuffer, you know, where people would get together and tell exaggerated stories and so on.
Well, brother, I said you caused that a clean shave, I caused that a bruised face. And
People were expected to entertain one another. If you couldn't entertain verbally, really you were sort of ostracized. People didn't want to see you if you couldn't.
Very Irish trait, by the way. My brother-in-law's from Ireland, and I've gotten to know his family quite well. It's just the ability to tell a good tale. It's very Irish.
Entertain them verbally.
Newfoundlanders, now and
Rippers
then,
are
can still entertain verbally.
Funny man.
This is a jihad. This is a holy war. The snow keeps coming, Frank. The back deck has been crushed. We haven't seen the dogs in weeks, and they're charging $5 for a head of rotten lettuce up to Sobeys.
When Newfoundland linguist Harold Paddock is in town, he talks like what Newfoundlanders call a townie. But when he's back on his North Shore island, he talks North Shore, just like his great-grandparents.
Well, me cousin Howard Ryder.
Hey guys, so my camera battery died, and if you notice, I'm wearing a different hat, and it is a different day, actually. My battery died, so I ended up charging it, and then my family came home from Christmas shopping, and it was impossible to film the rest. So, sorry for the interruption, but let's continue now, my friends.
How was Theo, man?
Pretty good, George.
I suppose they can't walk so fast as they could, Cass?
I think I'll walk faster.
A little tough to follow if you come from away, which may not be accidental.
Oh, yeah.
The sheep had all the boughs eat off, with his
So it
eyes
was
sticking
wood.
out. So like barbed wire, see?
Yeah.
And he made a smack at me, backhanded, you know, like that. And he wrapped right around me there, huh?
Oh.
Took off every pick of skin where he struck.
Newfoundland talk is slightly fading now. It's a little more like mainland speech. It's that confederation.
And in the grammar, you know,
It's such a unique accent, the Newfoundland accent. And I noticed he used the expression come from away, which I know what that means from my reaction very early on in the channel to the musical play Come From Away concerning Gander, Newfoundland's help that they did in the wake of 9/11.
suppression of the after perfect. Look what you're after doing now. This would give way to look what you've done now. We'd sound so weak and feeble. Look what you're after doing now. Look what you're after doing. Right? It's just so much more punchy, right?
Sure is.
You find distinct accents in Atlantic Canada in places the middle colony loyalists didn't get to first. The sounds of Gaelic can be heard in the English of Cape Breton.
Oh, when the dance would be over, sometimes some of them would start fighting.
And there's a rich mix of other sounds, from black loyalist English to traces of French and German. In the West, it's mostly Yankee loyalist, straight from Ontario. Ottawa sent Ontario settlers west to balance and absorb the French and Métis. The Ukrainians came late.
On the Canadian Pacific Railway that John A. Macdonald was instrumental in getting built.
And the Poles and all the rest. But the common accent was loyalist. The vocabulary, though, was homemade, fixed up on the spot. Old words spiffed up and put to work for completely new things. Black blizzard for a dust storm. Bluff for a grove of trees. And they borrowed words from the French and Métis. Coulee for a small ravine, and prairie itself from the French for meadow. There was even a local language called Bungay, a fusion of French, English, and Cree. Then another strong shot of American as tens of thousands of settlers moved north across the border. They brought along Spanish ranching words from the American Southwest. Bronco, canyon, rodeo, stampede, lasso, and ranch from the Spanish rancho. From American gold seekers in the Yukon and Fraser Valley came hitting pay dirt, panning out, and striking it rich. From loggers up and down the West Coast, Skid Road and flunky. And from Chinook jargon, another mixture of native languages with French and English, came high muckamuck for big shot, skookum for grand or strong, and Chinook for warm wind. There were Chinook jargon dictionaries to help the
I've heard the term people say high muckety muck, and I guess that's just variation on high muckamuck.
tenderfeet pick up the vocabulary. In the century since then, the brawny new language has crowded out the British forms the way Canadian nationalism crowded out the Empire.
Looking at it closely, you will find that it does so in a number of ways.
Farewell then to Vincent Massey's locution, the form linguists call Canadian dainty. Canadian dainty was finished off by the huge waves of immigrants who came after World War II, most of them not from Britain. The current Governor General, Adrienne Clarkson, came with her family from Hong Kong. She doesn't sound very much like Vincent Massey.
It is a pleasure to greet you in the Jubilee year of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
It's clear, clean Central Canada speech with no across the pond to it at all.
We will continue to speak out in every forum for the values of pluralism, freedom, and democracy.
In fact, if you search the archives, you'll find her saying things that would give A. Constable Geeky the pip.
The discount store pioneer. Fisher is a hardline union boss. A happy-go-lucky Canadian, eh?
Spelling still counts, of course. You'll remember Sir John A. Macdonald declared O-U-R to be the proper Canadian way. He thought it was British, and maybe it was back then. But Catherine Barber, who edits the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, says it's just Canadian now. Not long ago,
Really?
her dictionary listed labor under O-U-R, and that changed the game across the country.
When we were researching the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, the Canadian press style was to spell O-U-R words with an OR, and it had been their style for a very long time. And the Canadian press has a very strong influence on printed matter in Canada, on newspapers and magazines. What has happened subsequently, since the dictionary came out, the Canadian press has switched to OUR spellings. So there's actually been an increase in OUR spellings.
LABOUR.
The Canuck way.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're under 20, the Oxford Canadian Dictionary usage is preferred.
Because that's how I learned it, and it's like Canadian, and I don't like when Americans always think they're right.
She's young, and that's cute, but and Americans do that sometimes, and so do the Brits. But when we talk about language differences, the thing about the English language in any language, and you have this with French Canadian too, which is different than modern French. There is no valid way and invalid way of saying these things. It's just how the language has developed in spelling and usage and slang slightly differently depending on where you are. And I find that fun and unique, and I think it enriches the study of the language a lot. So, I mean, maybe that's just me, but I like it. But I was surprised that they said that, you know, people under 20 would know the OUR way, but maybe some older people would not be viewing it that way. And I'd like to hear from you guys. I mean, granted, this video is, I think, some 10, 15 years old now. I'm not really sure, but it's at least a decade old. How far back do you have to go in your memories to recall the time when you weren't using OUR as frequently?
Okay, I'm gonna try this one before I fall over.
Maybe these Vancouver kids spell like Canadians, but don't they talk like Californians?
What are you gonna wear with your the shorts you brought? Like with you? I don't know. Like, what would you wear?
Well, no, not exactly. We talk to other Canadians more than we talk to Americans, and that means some things about the way we talk are distinct.
No, I'm not saying at all.
But why? Doesn't television rule the universe? Why can't it change the way we talk?
No, it doesn't make you look fat. It's just not. You couldn't look fat if you tried.
Entertainment Tonight came down like...
Well, sure, Americans make most of our TV, and Americans on TV speak American, so we speak American. Actually, no.
Busy production schedule.
We use expressions from movies and TV.
Yeah, baby! Oh! What a totally amazing, excellent discovery. Not!
But 20 years of watching All in the Family wouldn't change.
I like the two Mike Myers examples. A Canadian playing a Brit in one instance and a Canadian playing an American in another instance. Obviously both exaggerated with Austin Powers and Wayne's World.
Your grammar or sentence structure, or make you sound like Archie.
Oh, yeah, sure. Let me tell you something. When a first burglar breaks into this house, you all turn to me and holler, do something. You know what I'm going to do?
Television doesn't do that. It's talking to other people that does.
Yeah, can you imagine a Canadian saying foist? That's an old New York accent that has died out. There's nobody really that does that anymore. My Irish-American grandmother used to say some words that way. She would say, instead of toilet, she would say turlet, and bottle for bottle. It was very interesting, but that accent is pretty much gone now.
At Niagara Falls, there's a few hundred meters of river between Canadians and Americans.
See that honey brown? Can I get that little honey brown? Something like that. Similar to that.
That's all. But listen to the table talk in Niagara Falls, New York.
It's not a couple of straw. Okay. Originally it was going to be, but then it was out of hand. There would have been 150 people there. So, you know,
that doesn't sound Canadian. How come?
You done with this?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
According to Edmonton drama professor David Lee, it's partly the rhythm of our speech, that musical quality called intonation. Lee says that Canadians tend to end each sentence by moving their tone of voice slightly upward, unlike Americans.
I think generally, most Americans, they go up early in the sentence, stress-wise, and then they come down hard at the end. So I'm very happy to be here today. Whereas a Canadian has a very gentle drifting up pattern. I'm very happy to be here today.
Would you pass me that book? Would you like to go out for some dinner? Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to do these one at a time. The first thing I want you to do is...
Lee's acting students need to learn that American pattern if they're going to do American accents.
Let's do the next one, Dale.
Okay. My house is down the street.
Good. Try lifting house up even a little bit more.
My house is down the street.
Good, there we go. You hear how that sounds much more American, doesn't it? Okay, let's do the next one. Renee.
Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Good. Dinner, even harder.
Dinner.
Yeah, again. Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Good, better.
Apart from intonation, what makes us different from Americans has mostly to do with how we pronounce vowels. For example,
before I get to the vowel thing, I'd just say, I mean, comparing that to generalized American, I think that's accurate from what they're saying, but there's so many varied accents here too. And even age-related accents, like he was saying, do they sound California to those young women? And you'll hear that a lot of young people speak in that sort of California way, where everything they say is almost like a question. It always raises at the end, and then as they mature, they sort of lose that, and then it just becomes more normalized. Anyway, let's continue.
Canadians pronounce the words
caught
and
caught
the same. Listen again.
Caught. Caught.
For most Americans, they're different.
Caught. Caught.
Catch that?
Caught. Caught.
The same goes for
Stalking.
and.
Stalking.
Canadians say them the same. Americans don't.
Stalking. Stalking.
We say
house
and
about.
Americans say
house
and
about.
And hear what we say as something like
who's
and
a boot.
And they think we're hilarious. Look at the American movie South Park.
As the Canadian ambassador, I hereby condemn the actions taken by America in apprehending towns and villages.
We don't know what all the fuss is about.
The fuss is about taking our citizens. It's about not censoring our art. It's about what's so goddamn funny?
Nothing. Could you tell us again what your argument is all about?
This is not about diplomacy. This is about dignity. This is about respect. This is about realizing that humor is...
We say
sorry.
They say
sorry
when they say it.
When we say it. Nice little dig. Oh, sorry guys, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I say sorry, and I do say it frequently. Anyway, again, I'm going to just say Canadian raising when they're talking about versus, and I'm sorry if I say this wrong. I know it's not a boot. I know that South Park actually probably caused a lot of damage in Americans actually thinking that that's real. It's exaggerated, and that is caricature. We understand that, but the Canadian raising is more like a boat, right? And I hear Canadians speak that way in varying degrees. It just sort of depends. And there are small regions in the United States where there's that kind of same sort of raising in accents. And I'd also say, the caught merger is regional. There are plenty of regions in the U.S. that say caught, the caught merger. In New York, definitely caught. Well, it depends on where in New York. Western New York near Buffalo, plenty of people who live across the river in Ontario over there will tell you their accent sounds more Chicago. It's like they use a lot of flat A's. Down here in the New York City metropolitan region, those who still have the strong regional accent would say a very, very different version of caught and quat. It's like quat. Same with marry, and marry. I marry somebody, I'm wishing you a Merry Christmas, and my neighbor's name is Mary, right? So in my accent, I say them differently, but there are regions in the U.S. that say Mary, and Mary. Merry Christmas, my neighbor is Mary, I'm going to marry you. So it's like all the same. And I'm curious, in Canada, is the Mary thing all the same? And does that also depend regionally? Probably.
Because we really need to get to something that's a little closer to what East Indian women wear,
I was just
right?
going to say, sorry.
It's closer to sorry, right?
And this is what I hear more than any other word from actors who worked on who've gone to the States or worked with Americans. That's the thing they get ribbed for. You're what? You're sorry? Because, of course, they're sorry.
We're going to have any travel problems for the better part of tomorrow.
And, of course, all this can change at a century's notice. For example, something the Americans have that we don't. The Northern City Shift, which has been going on in places like Niagara Falls, New York, for 50 years.
What's happening in Rochester and Syracuse, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, all the way to Minneapolis. And it is a movement of the vowel sounds in American English. So where we say top and box, they say tap and backs. Where we say
that's what I was just talking about.
Family, they say an and family.
It's not anymore. Would you write it on an index card?
It's important because it shows the strength of the Canadian-U.S. border as a linguistic divide. That northern city shift that's happening in all those big American cities.
That's a very interesting point because, like I said, our downstate New York accent is quite different than Buffalo region, Niagara. Very much Chicago-like. My name is John, and I have a friend from there that calls me Jan. But it's very interesting because obviously that's regional, and there's a pretty big space gap between Western New York and downstate New York. But right across the border in Canada, the influence didn't translate. I'm very curious to know why. I'm not going to find out in this video because this video is quite long, 43 minutes, and I think we've been at it long enough. So I'm going to end it here and stay tuned for part 2. I'll post it in a couple of days, my friends. All right? Thanks. Take care.